concludes the public input. Now we'll go to item 6, the local board input, and two relate to trees. I have first up Chair Peter Haynes from Albert Eden Local Board on tree protection, and then followed by Deputy Chair Saffron Toms from Waitakere Local Board on tree protection, and then we'll hear from Chair Lisa White on the Hobsonville Corridor plan. Peter, Chair Peter, welcome Peter. And Glenda, and the right-hand man.
Kia ora koutou.
Welcome Graham. Another more.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I will be the one doing the speaking unless people wish to pose questions to our Deputy Chair Glenda and long-standing Auckland Councillor of various sorts, Graham East. I'm also joined by Albert Eden's officially designated local hero, Roy Clements. Many of you will have heard of the Roy Clements Treeway, and he was honoured for his many, many decades of work to provide a beautiful little forest in Mount Albert. So I'd like to note firstly that the Albert Eden Local Board did resolve last November to ask the governing body to lobby government for a form of tree protection. Despite this, there is no reference to this in the report you've received, which is quite concerning, but I'd also note that local boards didn't have any meaningful involvement in the development of the urban forest strategy in the first place. It was discussed briefly at the local board chairs forum and in cluster workshops. We understand that a workshop for local boards individually was requested, and we are sorely disappointed that we didn't even have the opportunity to comment on a report before the urban forest strategy went to the Environment and Community Committee. And I just note that it is very hard. We can't really be expected to feel ownership of something that we didn't have meaningful involvement in developing. So had we been properly involved, then some of these problems that Dr. Barton was referring to might have been avoided. The main problem from our point of view is the slight attention given to the urban forest and the private realm, and in particular the diminution of that urban forest since the changes to the Resource Management Act. We'd note that we have been losing large trees that should have been scheduled, but there were exceedingly strict criteria. An example I would give you is the Pahutakawa on Araby Street, which was the subject of a TV3 news item. I got to speak on it, which was right on the streetscape, and if it were in this room it would pretty much fill the space that we're in. Somehow it just missed the cut, so to speak, and had no protection, and so it was felled. Now my point is that that's just one tree, and it wouldn't count for anything much in terms of the total cover. So one of the things is that you are being asked to make decisions simply on the basis of canopy cover. But in an area like Albert Eden, individual trees can be more important than the amount of canopy cover that they represent. And so the protections for notable trees and general tree protections are therefore more important in what the urban tree strategy calls the leafy suburbs, where the urban ngahere is dominated by exotic and native trees and private backyards. And they give examples, Epsom and Mount Eden, as well as Remuera. And these have moderate to good cover, it notes, but poor protection. And that is only part of the story, that's quite true. But, you know, unless you consider large trees, then you are missing part of the story, because they represent more than they do simply in terms of canopy cover. And we receive a lot of feedback every time we lose one of these trees. So we probably more than feedback on anything else. Right, yes. And so we don't have many significant ecological areas. And we'd also note, and here's something to keep in mind, that there is very limited potential for planting trees in the public realm in our area to compensate for the loss of the cover since the Resource Management Act change. And we know this because we've been through the process of looking for sites for the Mayor's million trees. And as you know, we don't have a lot of open space in Albert Eden per capita, less than anywhere else, probably bar Waitemata. We, you know, and to plant more trees in our small, generally small parks, which are relatively few in number, is extremely difficult. So with the exception of the Te Auanga Oakley Creek parks, there isn't much potential in our area. We've been through the exercise, we know that. So these trees are important to us, the ones in the private realm. And so I'd underline Dr. Barton's point about the lack of any data here, and support her recommendations 1 and 2, requesting an analysis of LiDAR data to demonstrate the loss of tree cover, particularly in the private realm, and also review data relating to consents regarding trees. We'd also strongly recommend that you adopt option 2 here. It's not an either-or thing, and indeed the chair has indicated that you may. Oh, sorry, yeah, option 2 about adding new trees to the schedule of notable trees, which Dr. Barton's also suggesting at 3. We also support Dr. Barton's 6th. Well, actually, we support, of course, all of her recommendations, but in particular, the request that the Consents Department stops issuing non-notified consents to remove trees, because, as she said, that actually equates to no real protection at all, and it has a major impact in our area. And we would request also that you adopt option 3 or some form of it, as we resolved at our November meeting, that you request government to amend the RMA to reinstate a form of general tree protection. We understand that that probably the previous general tree protection is not on offer, but some form of it, yes, do engage in a discussion, but do urge government to look at regulation, because in our view, regulation might not be the entire answer, but nor are the other options that are being promoted by this report. On their own, they won't do it either. We don't believe that there is only a potential minor reduction in Auckland's tree cover likely if we continue the status quo. We know it's been very real and very great, and we would like to see the research done that is necessary to demonstrate what has actually been happening. You are being asked once again to make a decision with no real idea of the scope of the problem.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you, Peter. Questions of Peter as chair of the board? Councillor Casey.
I've got two questions. One's for Peter and one's for Roy. I'll give Roy a chance to have a think, but I'll ask it now. Roy,
I'm sorry, look, I'm just going to have to come in there. Because this is local board input, and Roy, I really respect the work you've been doing, but unfortunately, I can't take local community input in the local board part of the agenda. I just can't do that.
the father of trees in Mount Albert.
Look, it could be Sister Teresa. I can't do it.
Mother Teresa.
Kathy will talk to Roy later,
And then
I'm
it's the
sure.
board chairman, Peter Haynes.
Thank you.
Peter,
And obviously tell I'm a lapsed Catholic.
in our report, I'll read you a sentence which I know that you've read already, but I'd like to know your view of the sentence. And it's paragraph 29 of our report.
Yeah.
And it reads, of course, everything costs money. If we do anything, it costs money. But if we do nothing, it says here, the costs of the status quo include a potential minor reduction in Auckland's tree cover. Could you say what you've seen as board chair in Albert Eden about that minor reduction?
With respect, I think I already have. Yeah, no, it's not minor, and except that it might be minor in terms of the canopy cover loss, but I instanced, I gave you an example where a tree, this size, it's not a huge loss of canopy cover, but actually that whole area around Araby Street, which you are very familiar with, now looks rather bare. Because that was the only large tree for some streets. As you know, this is off the side of Balmoral Road, where the Indian temple is. And behind there now, it is a very bare area. It really, and that's just a loss of one tree. So no, a potential minor reduction, I wish, then we wouldn't have had so many complaints and people raising this over and over again, including in our most recent Have Your Say events. You were there. It is not a potential minor reduction, and that, I should say, is just an assertion because there's no evidence to back it up, which is very poor report writing in my view. And that's why we're saying do the research first before you make any decisions.
And I'd just like to say thank you to Roy for the thousands of trees that you've planted along that treeway over many, many decades. Thank you so much.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I also want to give my thanks to Roy. Although he doesn't live in the Ōrākei ward, I know that your contribution to the tree planting in our ward has been significant, so thank you. But my questions are obviously to you, Peter, and they're two main ones.
Yep.
First, can you just remind me, because it's hasn't been that long, but it's been a bit long. Can you just remind me, the local boards get a copy of all the consents that come through, notified and non-notified. Can you remind me if tree consents come through to local boards?
Yes, and they and it's a weekly cause for concern. So we see all these consents coming through, and in particular, my colleagues here monitor those, and there's nothing we can do.
So thank you, because that actually means that there is data. It is up-to-date data, and it's going through regularly to local boards. So that's the reason for my question.
It's doable.
Thank you. And the second question I have for you is around and I'll ask this of the staff later, but the process around the input. So, of course, we have a local board impact and local board views as part of a new reporting template. The people who have written this report have chosen just to copy bits from every local board from your local board plan. Yep. But just take me back to the way this subject was presented to you in the local board chairs forum, and was it just FYI, or was there an expectation that this be resolved upon in a local board meeting? Because obviously local impact, the impact of the decision around this will be either great, less, whatever, but there will be local impact. So there's a bit missing for me. You sort of glibbed over the fact that it had been presented at the local board chairs forum, but I couldn't actually get what you thought that process was.
Well, that was in respect of the urban forest strategy, not the current paper, the current report. So even the urban forest strategy was, a brief discussion at the local board chairs forum, which does not, that as you know, is not the same as consulting local boards at all.
No, I know.
Because there are only 20 or so local board members present.
It's only one member.
But also in the cluster workshops. And if I'd known that cluster workshops were going to substitute for workshops at local board level and reports on matters of such significance, then I think I will be asking for a rethink of cluster workshops, whether or not we should have them at all.
Okay. So my last question then is, do you think the local board input and the local board views is adequate from your perspective in this report?
Oh, totally inadequate. This current report, totally. As I said, we've passed a resolution. The report doesn't even make mention of it. So what weight is given to a local board resolution, you might ask?
Well, that got passed. If I could just add that one of the questions you asked was whether we were getting tree resource consents coming through. We only get some of them. A lot of them are non-notified. So we only get a few of them coming through, and those are often in areas next to ecological sites, of which we hardly have any at all. So only very few are coming through.
You only get the notified, not the non-notified.
It is only the protected trees that are required to have a resource consent. So it is a minority of a minority that run past the board. A vast majority, and this is the whole point. In the report, at point 35, it doubts whether some sort of regulation would have any success. And the point is that under the old system, you had to go and talk to someone about whether to cut the tree down. Now you don't have to talk to anybody except your arborist with his chainsaw.
Or hers.
And that means that there can be trees coming down which don't need to, because they're not in the way of anything, but people just assume they might be, so better safe than sorry, deck the lot.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
Councillor Simpson has asked my question.
Thank you. Just on that then, there are no further questions. You have a resolution and you are saying it's from what board meeting? Did your local board staff forward it?
I asked and they said that they did.
It was after
You have it here, sorry.
It was after the agenda was online.
It's here.
Well, it was November. We also passed one, of course, at our most recent board meeting.
Thank you. Got it here. It's 28th of March.
Yeah.
And
So I did ask what happened to the previous one. I was
And
told
it's
that it
been-
would simply have been circulated to governing body members and left at that. And
yeah, members, we can't have this resolution in a report that is
No.
effectively written and almost printed prior to you passing your resolution.
I'm
So it is-
referring to
it
the
is distributed today.
November 2017 resolution, which actually dealt specifically with a matter that is addressed here in option 3. That was exactly on that point, and yet there is no mention
I
of
see.
it
I
made.
take your
And
point.
it just speaks to
Okay.
how much weight is given to
Somebody like to
resolutions.
would somebody like to move?
Yeah, I'd love to move.
Councillor Casey.
Yep.
Thank you, with exuberance, and Councillor Collins. Thank you.
No.
All those in favour say aye.
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 Contrary, no. Declare that carried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, Graham, and Glenda, and Roy. And now we'll ask for Saffron Toms on behalf of the Waitakere Rangers Local Board to come on up. Welcome, Saffron. Also on tree protection.
Kia ora koutou, thank you for having me today. So the councillors will have been sent through we sent through a message to the DA today, so that is available if people want to.
We've only
refer.
just
Yes, sir.
got that.
So I will just basically be saying that. It's just for your interest
Okay.
to have a copy. So for the past few years, we've already seen that urban trees are at risk, and the continued decline in the urban forest is almost inevitable unless strong and effective protection measures are put in place. The Waitakere Ranges Local Board, as you know, has taken a keen interest in this issue since its inception. The coverage in our local board area, we estimate at least, although we've asked for the LiDAR data and are very interested to see what that says. Our local board tree coverage totals some 75%. So that's the most of any urban area, if you can classify our area as urban in the region. Trees are highly valuable, and this makes us even more appreciative of the beneficial effect of trees, and we're aware of the losses that occur when they're removed. Indeed, it's a regular occurrence for us to be contacted by members of the public concerned about the level of tree loss that they feel like they're actually witnessing, and the sound of chainsaws, and it's highly alarming to our community. So we'd like to provide the following feedback, but also to support the recommendations that were brought to the committee by Dr. Mel Spartan. But what we see as an important first step is the revocation of the changes made to the RMA by the previous government, which took away the abilities of local authorities to afford tree protection. So we urge the committee to consider advocating to central government a simple change to the RMA, and that's the revocation of sections 76, 4A and 4D, and section 152 in the associated changes, and the associated changes to part 1 of Schedule 12, so that the previous government's removal of tree protection can be reversed. I'm not a big expert on the RMA. It's a huge and complicated document, but it has been best described, in my opinion, by one academic who called it an unhappy marriage between neoliberalism and environmentalism.
Oh, gracious me.
But the Act requires leans very, very heavily on the tool of mitigation. And mitigation is a very, very rough science. It fails to appreciate the complexity of soil microbe structures, invertebrates and things like that. Replacing like for like in the environmental sphere is not a simple thing. Urban trees on residential sections in this city, unless someone applies to schedule them and they meet the very, very stringent conditions and criteria, which we've already heard is nigh on impossible, they're the only part of nature that cannot be protected under the divisions of a district plan. As well as that, trees and SEAs aren't guaranteed protection either, as we've also seen. The inconsistency of the existing provisions is highlighted by consideration of Section 5 of the RMA, which states that the purpose of the RMA of this Act is to promote the sustainable management of natural and physical resources. In this Act, sustainable management means managing the use, development and protection of natural and physical resources in a way or at a rate which enables people in their communities to provide for their social, economic and cultural well-being and for their health and safety, while sustaining the potential of natural and physical resources to meet the reasonably foreseeable needs of future generations, safeguarding the life-supporting capacity of air, water, soil and ecosystems, and avoiding, so I will just gloss over that stuff, so avoiding, remedying or mitigating any adverse effects of activities on the environment. The amendments made in the RMA in 2012 and 13 significantly weakened the ability of the Act to deliver on its purpose, with its ruling that urban areas on residential properties cannot be protected, at least as far as district plan provisions are concerned. These changes, if these changes are made, then the district plan can again be changed to provide for meaningful tree protection. The consent application process to then fell a tree need not to be overly complicated. We can work through those things. But the Waitakere Rangers Local Board therefore urges the committee to support local government to have a say in tree protection and indeed have responsibility therefore and accountability to protecting the environment. So I'm really here just to comment on the lived experience, as I've done. And before the changes, there was a common understanding, really, that native trees were protected, especially if they were over a certain size or a certain age. And in our community, I can say, myself included, were quite surprised that there was no actual protection by default of these important areas. Urban trees are part of the ecological corridor, and we can plant new things, but if we're dependent on developers planting new things, then the tendencies of those kinds of gardens also end up being quite, susceptible to fashions, and fashions change, and trees get pulled out, and the soil microbes change, and all of that sort of stuff. So, fully support the recommendations brought by Dr. Miles Barton. We think a very, very important step is to advocate to central government to rescind the changes made to the RMA. Also, I just want to quickly comment on the lack of information in the report and indicate my concern that it does seem as though we're getting to a little bit of a trend where reports tend to be written for a budget, perhaps. I'm not sure, but we had the consultation on the Regional Pest Management Plan recently. That plan was written to a budget, and my concern is that when we ask for information about really important things like environmental protection, and we ask for the response, our council response, to fit into a budget that we can afford, then we are compromising the information that we are receiving. If we ask for our reports to respond within a predefined budget, how can we get honest advice if what the response required is unaffordable? So anyway, thank you very much for hearing us today, and I wish you the best with making the right decision.
Thank you, Saffron. Stay with us because we've got a few questions. Councillor Casey first.
Yeah, Saffron, I guess you were in the room when you heard Dr. Peter Haynes talk about the lack of consultation over the urban forest strategy with the Albert Eden Local Board. Could you talk to us about your board's association with that particular document? And is this paper you've presented today in response to this report, or is it in response to something else?
The paper that we've presented today, that the one that was just been emailed, that's in response to finding out that this is on your agenda. Received the report quite late in the piece, but I guess I would just like to say as well that bringing something like this, that's obviously of huge significance to local boards, but especially Waitakere Rangers Local Board, I mean that's just obvious, everybody knows that. For it just to go to the Chairs Forum is really insufficient, and in terms of the urban forest strategy as well, no, that was in a cluster workshop, and I would say on that as well that we don't receive the agendas necessarily for cluster workshops.
Can you just tell me what a cluster workshop is?
So, local board members are now invited to attend cluster workshops which are held sub-regionally across the region, and they're either at the Manukau Service Centre or Henderson or North Auckland or Central City. And if you can go to one, you say yes. Usually, if it's very... you don't, unless it's a couple of days before the actual workshop, you don't necessarily know what's on the agenda, so it's quite hard to commit to. And I suppose...
everybody invited to that in those board areas?
I can speak for myself. You're given an invitation to attend all four, and you can accept one. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Yeah, Saffron, look, I mean, I need to declare that I don't support what you're seeking in terms of the changes to the RMA. I guess the question here is Section 5 of the Act, which you've spelt out, and you've identified the purpose, and it really does reflect the unhappy marriage, I suppose, between development interests and some of the environmental aspirations that you seek. But where does the desire to protect a tree, how does that sit alongside the private property rights of Aucklanders who own property and who want to capitalise? Now, I'm not saying that I want to give developers carte blanche. That's certainly not what I want to do. But when a lot of these trees are not in the public realm, they're on private property. Obviously, the people who want to capitalise their land and extract value from it, they're entitled to do so. Where do you get the balance between those competing interests? Because it seems to me, if we change the Act, and it's obviously an issue for central government, it's simply removing the rights of those property owners and putting it back into the realm of officials who would then go away and say, well, actually, we're going to exercise our discretion in relation to your application.
Yes, I suppose it's a very, I guess it's an ideological question in some ways, but it's also, I think we've got to get to a point, and I think we're well past the point where we need to seriously look around at our environment and say, is this working? And I mean, I've been to different parts. I'm lucky. I grew up in Titirangi. It was much more. It was the outback. Back then, there were dirt roads when I was a kid. But I've been to other parts of the city, and I've felt it hot. I felt the warm air, the dust. There's no kind of relief from the heat, and it's because you look around and there's no trees, and that's affecting our whole neighbourhoods. And you can talk about individual property rights, but actually we've all got a collective right to live in a place that works and that feels alive, in my opinion. And trees really provide a huge ecosystem service. In my opinion, trees need to be afforded a great sense of value, to the point that if you buy a property and there's a big tree on it, you should understand that that tree is part of the property and it will stay with it. Developers use all sorts of tools that tend to stay with the property further on. Covenants, for example, building covenants. Developers put building covenants on property and stipulate the kinds of developments that can be done on that property, and those covenants go from owner to owner to owner. Why not be able to put something like that on trees? It's actually, I would say it's a quality, and it's a characteristic of the property that should stay with the property, the tree, just as as a stipulation on kind of development.
Thank you. Good question, good reply. And thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Just to ask your opinion on something. Quite obviously, we've got a couple of diseases, one of which is Carry dieback, another one of which is myrtle rust, both of which affect Carry, myrtles, Pohutukawa, Rata, Kanuka, Manuka. Has your local board considered the context of that in the light of this urban forest, in the light of these recommendations and the fact that those diseases aren't mentioned, or the loss is not mentioned in this report?
As a local board, we have not collectively responded to the report. In terms of the urban forest strategy, as far as I know, none of our members were able to get to a cluster workshop, as far as I know. So that's just a bit of a statement on the logistics of those cluster workshops as well. So yes, it's another act within that. But I would also say that if we're depending on the planting of new trees, and if we're going to accept the destruction, the further and rapid decline of the urban forests, then we are also accepting the decline in ecological corridors, and those ecological corridors are what gives our forests the ability to have an enhanced gene pool and therefore enhanced resistance to things like that.
Okay, and the other question I've got is just around your advocacy position as far as the RMA is concerned. So what I'm seeing here is you're suggesting, one, that the government change the legislation, and two, that the council is then in a position to look at its district plan and look at how most appropriately to provide whatever form of protection we would want under that. Is that correct?
Yes, I think, so the main point is that the first thing is to regain the ability to actually have some power over it and therefore public accountability too.
Thank you, Saffron.
Okay.
Good questions. That draws us to a close
you.
of that submission, and we will move accordingly. Who would like to move? Councillor Cooper and Councillor Hulse will move acknowledgement. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Lastly, on the local board input, Chair Lisa White from Upper Harbour discussing the Hobsonville Corridor Plan. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. I wasn't going to come this morning, but then, like the sound of my own voice, I couldn't resist. I actually came along today to speak in support of your report that's item 10. And I thought the reason I should come is because often we come when we're coming to complain. And actually, this is where we need to acknowledge that the officers worked really well with our local board on this. And not only that, more importantly, they worked with our community. Our community were outraged by a development that was allowed under the operative unitary plan, and it's essentially been prompted by this enormous mini storage building that is front and centre on Hobsonville Road. So what they were able to do was accommodate the concerns of our community, work with us and make sure that the community's concerns were addressed in the plan change that was going to happen anyway. So I thought today I'll come along and do my cheerleader bit and say thank you to the officers that did that. The community were really upset. They got good engagement when the plan change was notified, and they listened to the community. So that makes me look good doing my job, and I'm very grateful. So I'm asking for your support for the resolutions that you have in item 10. It should be a no-brainer because you don't have to allocate any extra money. And you're going to make your local board happy, and more importantly, we're going to make our community happy. So if I could get you to acknowledge the officers at the appropriate moment and thank them for doing that, because all too often we're criticising and complaining, and in this instance they've done a great job, and I'd like to say thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Well done, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Obviously, if you've got any questions, I can rant on for hours, but just...
I will ask that question. Are there any questions?
I will
Councillor
thank
Hills.
Lisa.
No, it was just, thank you so much for coming. But also, I went and checked it out, and it is, it seems like a terrible mistake, but it was there, so I'm so glad that
That's not
we're
a
able
question.
to... Are you glad
Won't
we're
be
able to
more
go
of
forward in
them.
a positive way?
I'm very glad there won't be more of them. It's extremely visible from the motorway, and it front faces residential property, which is not the intended outcome. So
thank you so much for the advocacy.
Yeah, I
Councillor
do have a
Cooper.
question. Because I know that I get a lot of the flack, and so do Councillor Hulse and Councillor Clow, for promising this would never happen in Waitakere days, and it has now. So I think, unfortunately, the horse is bolted in some parts of this, and you can see it happening every day. Do you think the community will be satisfied with the new proposals, or is it going to be a matter of we won't get any more of this stuff after a certain time? There will still be some consents in there already, and they'll pop up. How do you think the community in this consultation actually understand that? Because that's my biggest concern.
yeah, no, and I'm sure, and thank you, you've fronted a large number of angry residents on this matter because you're out there in the local community. We can't change what's already been consented, and I have tried to convince people that actually demolishing what's there is not really a reasonable suggestion, although it's a frequent one that's made out there. we just need to be clear that once this has gone through its appropriate process, we won't have more of this. Consideration is being given to the impact on the school that's immediately next door. The urban design manual and the unitary plan was going to resolve concerns like this, and of course that's not in place. So in answer to your question, we just need to be clear that what's gone through the consented process is what will happen. But we have taken steps to prevent it being more widespread than it already is. So,
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you.
The urban design manual is in place, but the IHP knocked out a lot
Yep.
of the design.
sorry, the concerns that people have
Aspiration
raised
that we had.
with this corridor, there are real limitations on what could be done about setback from the street and the urban design treatments that could have made things a better outcome and didn't, but will in future prevent more of the big boxes shading people's houses
Or even
from
just a
lunchtime.
window would be nice.
Thank you.
Glass would be good.
Somebody like to move, Councillor Watson or Councillor Walker?
Sure.
For Upper Harbour. Councillor Watson and Walker moved in second.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Great.
Thanks, Lisa.
All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Declare that carried.
Mr. Chairman, can we have 5?
No, we'll have 10.
10. Excellent. Good man.
Come back.
Chairman,
We'll
Good
take a break for 10 minutes because it's been quite a haul to here. Let's make it. Should we make it 1:45 midday? We'll reconvene. So we'll adjourn until 11:45.
That is the actual between development and preservation. Yes, that's like a middle ground really.